All right, so let's just get started with, I guess, the big thing that's probably on everyone's mind, the movie that was made this year. 15 years later,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it was. I had kept track of when the show I've said I've met some of you folks, I know, and I've always said the show did not end, the show stopped, and there's a big difference between those two things. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I was blindsided by it. I think we all were. It was a hit. Like, how the hell do you cancel a hit? And I worked, on for seasons 2 and 3 on the writing staff, so I was there every day, and I had no clue. So it was a blindside punch to me. And I'm sure, how did you get the phone call? I don't know if I've heard this story. Did you get the phone call from Dave or what?
Well, you know, Dave was close to all of us, so he wasn't hard to read. I don't know about you. I could tell something was not right, in the final episode. And I saw him walk off talking to himself
Yeah.
one day.
We're talking David Milch, who's the
David
show
Milch.
creator and writer.
He was walking off talking to himself
Yeah.
and looking up in the sky, and I said, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
I feel, I've been around long enough to know when a showrunner is like,
Yeah.
he wants to tell you something, but he can't right now.
Yeah.
And I felt it. So I don't know about you.
Well, no, I was blissfully, blindly unaware.
Yeah.
I got that phone call from Dave. But in regards to the movie, he had been offered 2 movies. They wanted to cut the budget in half. And David was offered 2 movies, 4 hours, or half a series, so 6 episodes, to tie it all up. Well, Dave being Dave, he made an all-in move. Nope, that's not how we tell our story. No. And we stopped. So I kept track of, I said, all the horses are out of the barn, but I grew up on a farm in Kentucky. I can get horses back in the barn because I've done it. And I had a notepad next to my phone in my office, and I was keeping track of who was doing everything. And I did that for 2 years. And then I finally got to the point that I tore that. Really where I hung it up was Sean Bridgers and I met up there on the set of John from Cincinnati, because they shot there where we shot. And I walked down the back lot with Sean. We didn't say a word to each other. For 30 minutes, we sat on the steps of the Chez Ami, and that was like mourning. And that was the point where I let go. Still, finally gave up, tore up that piece of paper. I wish I'd kept it, because I do remember 2 notations. Anna, some meth show in ABQ. Tim, lawman, a cop show in Kentucky, parentheses, see if there's a job for you in it. So, when I had emailed David's wife about something else, and I'd finished the pilot. I was shooting, actually, the pilot for Preacher, and I had a message from her, and she answered my question, and she said, and actually, it's funny, we just talked to HBO today. There's a good chance we're returning to the thoroughfare. So that was 3 years before the movie came to fruition.
Yeah, I noticed rumblings about it online for a while,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it definitely cut off in the 3rd season, right? And the movie did tie up some things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also left some questions, which I'm sure the audience has. We'll get to that later. But how'd you end up with the roles in the first place?
Well, if you saw the pilot script, Wu had no line in it. He comes in, he picks the guy up, he throws him into the pig pen. So I met David, and I had done NYPD Blue a couple times with him. And it was a great experience, and I just hit it off with him very well. I said, David, whoever does the role of Wu, even if it's not me, and I use a kind of not politically correct word at the time, but this is a word we use in Hawaii. I said, don't make Wu a panty, which was like panty waist. In other words, how we have been portrayed in the past has always been passive or effeminate. I said, Wu has got to be on a par with everybody else, including evilness, and corruption, and the willing to survive, because we were talking about my people during that period who helped the country build itself. And we built the railroads. And that's what I told them. I said, don't forget, we built the railroads. So we weren't passive. We were. And he kind of agreed with me on that. He says, well, look, you got no lines in the pilot, but when we go to a script, I'm going to take care of you. And that was it.
Yeah. Awesome. For me, it was an audition. I had committed to doing a play in Nashville with Steve Earle, the songwriter. I was a rabid Steve Earle fan for years, and I met him at an airport.
And you made me one, too.
Oh, yeah. A big country music nut. Anyway, Steve had written this role for me in the play, and I'd committed to doing it. And I was in that. I had met with Milch. They sent me the script. Well, Doherty, there's 4 lines of Doherty in the pilot. And I said to my agent, I said, you know, I am not interested in being the thug in the shadows for 7 years. So I said, look, how about McCall? That's only 4 episodes, you get killed. I said, I don't give a shit. It's something to play. It's something memorable. So I went to the audition, and I'd been on 6 Feet Under with the same casting people, same production people too. So Libby comes out, and she goes, you're doing Doherty. I said, yeah, but I want to do McCall. I thought my agent told you that. Okay. Do you have both? I said, yeah. So go in the room. It's Walter Hill and David on the couch. And we did McCall. And David kind of looks at Libby, and she goes, no, we've got Doherty. We got Doherty too. Let's do Doherty. So we do the 4 lines of Dan Doherty. And I see David perk up, and he leans forward on the couch. He goes, all right, we're going to do this again. Now, I want you to think about this. And he starts parsing every syllable, every punctuation mark, and talking about, now subtextually, the reason that you phrase it that way is because the thought that's going through your head is blah, blah. And it really hit me in the room of like, this guy doesn't write thugs and shadows. There's nothing periphery to the stories he tells. And that's when I got excited about, I need to be a part of this. So it came down for me for the offer. I was in Nashville, and we were about to open the show, and I got a call from my agent, and they said, if you can't work on October 31st, that was Halloween of 2002, they have to hire somebody else because they can't accommodate you on the schedule. So I hang up the phone. Steve's there. He heard it. Steve goes, I said, look, man, I promised you a year and a half ago that I would do this. I am not leaving the play. He goes, yeah, man, but I'll feel like shit if I cost you a TV show. And so long story short, we ended up, we canceled 1 performance. And then the Friday night, he picked me up at the airport. We drove to the theater. I changed clothes, and I walked on at curtain. So it all came out. And then, Hooplehead Steve was based on him a few years later. And that's a story in and of itself that we may get to at some point, although it's very inappropriate for children to hear.
But, because of Earl, we got a lot of music stars that came on the show, that he brought on the show. And
well, we had I love music all over the format. From the series, I had Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead, Scotty Ian of Anthrax, Jerry Cantrell of Alice in Chains, Rex Brown of Pantera. Rodney Crowell came to visit. There was nothing that he could play cowboy in at that point. And then when we did the movie, who I introduced, you'd never even heard of the guy, and then you became like his #1 fan is Jason Isbell.
Yeah, but ZZ Top.
But Dusty and Billy of ZZ Top are Hawkeye's Guns. And yeah, if you ever see it again, we talk about Hawkeye's Guns for 3 or 4 episodes. And I had met Billy in L.A., and I knew that, it's a funny story. I'd bought my wife this book, or a pair of boots at Boot Star, and they had Billy's book there, and Rock and Roll Gearhead. And I went, I got to have one. They're autographed. I said, dude, these are all. He goes, Billy hangs out here. He lives just up the hill. I said, I love that band. What are they doing? He says, well, Billy's been doing TV stuff for fun. I said, dude, if he likes Deadwood. So it was Super Bowl Sunday when the Rolling Stones played the Super Bowl. I get a phone call right as the Stones finish. I'm like, who is calling me? Private number. Hello?
Yeah, may I speak with Earl, please?
Yeah, it's Earl.
Hey, this is Billy F. Gibbons. Javier at Bootstar gave me your number.
So I tell David, I said, dude, I said, so you want to do this? Yeah, I'd love to. He said, would it be all right if I bring my bass player? Dusty quotes that show like it's the Bible. So they were Hawkeye's Guns. And
well, let's talk a little music. How about, was it Sacred Cowboys?
Yeah, Sacred Cowboys.
You want to talk about that?
They don't want to hear about Sacred Cowboys. I play with a band called the Sacred Cowboys in Los Angeles. We were an actual working band for about 5 years, from '04 to '09. We played Stagecoach, the band that I like to say they opened for us, but they just happened to be on the schedule in front of us. The Zach Brown Band. Don't know whatever happened to those dudes. But yeah, we started playing together again about a year ago. We have a guest lead singer. He's done 2 shows with us. This guy right here. Which came about with Isbell.
Yeah.
What were we playing? We played Long Black Veil, and you stepped in and started singing a harmony on it.
Yeah.
We finished, and you go, oh, same chords, keep going, same chord progression. So we just start GCDing, and then he starts singing Hawaiian Cowboy in Hawaiian.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really an honor for me to play with these guys because they're a bunch of great musicians, and we did a couple shows together. It was wonderful.
But Jason, that was the wedding scene in the movie. You seen the film? Well, the wedding scene, Jason was there, and I said that was when it really sunk in what it all meant to us, because the scene, it's a celebratory scene, and thematically the movie is about the passing of generations. One generation is born, another generation dies off, and community continues. So, I mean, that's David. You probably know David's facing his own serious health issues, and very likely that will be his final thing. But that's what happened, and I invited Jason to come out. So we had those 3 days of between setups. We had a little green room set up in the corner. We had a 3-day Jason Isbell concert. Like everyone would. I remember Oliphant comes in. He sits down. He says, you got to know Tim. He's got a great sense of humor. He's such a dry sense of humor. But he says, hey, I'd like to hear that song that you wrote about me. Oliphant. There's a song called Elephant. That's a really depressing song about cancer. And Jason played it. So, yeah. So that moment, that kind of community and camaraderie, he's singing with us. I didn't realize Cleo was a Broadway singer.
Oh, yeah.
So the community and love that was in the room between everyone was exactly what was happening in the wedding scene. So we weren't acting. The looks on everybody's faces, the feelings that everybody had were genuine, because we were literally just moving from that corner to over here on the stage and doing the same that we were doing in the corner.
And I hope that the HBO decides to come out with a director's cut.
Yeah.
Because that scene is it's a little longer.
Yep.
And I think they cut about 40 minutes out of it.
Yep. It was 2 hours and 30 minutes, and they cut it down to 150.
Yeah, so I hope that they will put out the director's version, and I'm looking forward to that. I have a question. Like you were in the writer's room. How much of the script, besides the monologues, you had this line. We did this scene, the San Francisco scene.
Cobb Shucker scene.
Yeah, where you go, he looks like you, he's from San Francisco, and he's got your dander up. I was like, dander? Who wrote dander? I said, was that your Earl's line, or was that David's line?
I don't know. Everyone wrote on every episode, and then David rewrote every one.
Right.
So I can't say, there's one episode that has my name on it.
Yeah.
There might be 7 or 8 lines that are actually what I wrote as I wrote them. There's elements of the script I had nothing to do with, Regina Corrado. Mm-hmm. So it was all like that. We all wrote, and then David would kind of reprocess. Now, like Ted Mann and then Liz, as she came along, there were writers that he kept their stuff more intact. But, David said stories have a way of telling themselves. He goes, as a writer, you are a vessel. And your job as a writer is to open your spirit and open your ears, listen, and the story will come through you.
Yeah,
so
you being from Kentucky,
yeah.
did you come up with your own things?
There were certain phrases and stuff that I tossed in.
Yeah.
I tossed in one thing on the baseball scores. The morning of the infamous the ball, I wish you'd print the ball scores a little more fucking prompt. The night before was the Bartman incident at Wrigley Field. If any of you baseball fans, you know what I'm speaking of. And as a Cub fan, your heart just sunk because you knew what was going to happen. They were going to blow a 2-game lead and lose again. So the next morning, I came in, having been up half the night, bugged about that game. And I said, Dave, can I add something to this? What do you have in mind? I said, well, the Cubs actually started as the Chicago well, let's see. They were the White Sox the first season. Then they were the Orphans, then the Colts, and the Cubs. And they started that year, 1888, 87 or 88. I said, can I add something about the Cubs? What do you have in mind? I said, I want to say that new league started a team in Chicago with Cap Anson and something about the ball scores. So we wrote it down. So that was my tip of the hat to the Cubs, and my hope that every time I'd go to Chicago, I would get free beer. That hasn't happened yet. But that literally was. If you see it again, you'll know that was the morning after Steve Bartman reached out for a foul ball.
You talk about inspirations for characters. Wasn't your character inspired after someone in your family? Is that right?
Well, parts of it. My grandfather was a tough old man. The eyeball fight came directly from. I had written something in season 2 called "Son of a Bitch." My grandfather. I may have told some of you this story. I told someone I know since I've been here. But my grandfather wouldn't allow anyone to call him that word. Again, from Kentucky. They were from Marshall County, Hardin. And as he said, that's because that's defaming my mama, and nobody defames my mama. I told my mother what he had said, and my mother said, well, that's ironic, because if there was ever a bitch that walked the planet, it was my grandmother. She said, I was just a girl, but when she died, I prayed to God and thanked him for killing her. So that would explain some of my grandfather's issues in life. But my mom's first husband, she was a teenager, got pregnant, had my sister, husband left her, he was older. My grandfather encountered him at a gas station. This is back in the 50s. And Loman was his name. He said, Loman, you have a child. He goes, we need to speak. So he took him behind the filling station so none of his buddies could hear it. My uncle witnessed this. He was 9 years old. He said, Loman, you have a daughter. Now, I know you don't want to be a daddy, but a baby needs clothes and a baby needs food. I'm putting a roof over their head. Now, you're going to live up to your responsibility. So he turned to walk away, and Loman, trying to save face, goes, yeah, you better walk away, yo son bitch. And Gerald said, my granddaddy turned, and he was a big man, and he hit Loman so hard in the forehead that Loman's eyeball popped out of his skull. Loman collapsed to his knees, fell to the side. Les starts stomping him. He picked up a chunk of coal. He was going to brain him. And my grandfather's eyes would dilate. His pupils would turn black. His eyes would, and when he was in a rage. And Loman had a buddy who was handicapped. He walked on crutches. He come up and tried to grab him. And he said, Daddy pushed him down and said, get away or I'm killing you too. And he said, that's when I saw his eyes, and I knew. So Gerald ran up and grabbed him so that he couldn't kill him. So I wrote that, Being one to pull all the skeletons out of the family closet, I wrote it in season 2.
But you know that fight with the captain.
Yeah.
You eventually pull his eye out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, season 2 I wrote a story called Son of a Bitch with me and Soapy the soap seller telling the exact story of Loman. And so Soapy comes into the gym, $5 bar soap, $5 inside. And then Doherty ushers him out the door, and he calls Doherty, yeah, you better go back in, you son. So I wrote exactly what happened. Wow. We never used it.
But you used the eye thing.
Well, the eye thing came about. Do you remember Keller?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there was an advisor on the show who was an old rodeo cowboy who was an enforcer for Vegas, for gambling interests in Vegas. And his thing was he would take somebody's eyeball. He didn't break knees. He took eyeballs.
Oh, my God.
And so the next season, the fight rolls around. And this is a story about the fight. So I guess I'll go ahead and it's the fight. So David said, all right, we have 3 days of rehearsals. He brought me, Al Graff, who was the captain, Mike Watson, stunt coordinator, and Dan Minahan, the director. He goes, you have 3 days. On the page, it just says Dan and the captain fight. Looks like Dan's going to die. He turns the tide, beats the captain, kills him. That was about all that was there. So he says, you have 3 days to create something, and I have 3 rules. Number 1, I want everything completely realistic. I don't want any big cowboy roundhouses flying through plate glass cliches. Number 2, I want every time the audience thinks it's going to ebb, I want it to escalate. I want the audience not to be able to draw a fucking breath for 5 minutes. Number 3, I want something I ain't ever seen before. Make it up. So we tried stuff. Like Dan wanted to be in the meat market. We've never used the raw meat. We got to be in there. I said, how about we drown in horse piss? We tried this, that, and the other. So Dave would come in at the end of the day, watch what we had, beat by beat. The only thing he changed is me and the captain were supposed to roll underneath a moving horse. And he was afraid that would take up too much time. It was dangerous to do. So if you notice, we have the camera shoot between the horse's legs, but we don't go between. That's the only thing he took out. So at the end of the second day, he pulls me aside and he said, I was going back to that son of a bitch thing that you did. I was thinking that we might use that, but you're getting your ass whipped. You're about to die. I don't see how, because you're overpowering. And Keller, I was thinking about Keller with the eyeball, and I don't know how we're going to get out of this fucking scene. So I play poker with a group of musicians. And I was playing poker that night, and Robin Weigert plays with us too, and you have to come. Well, you'll take all of our damn money. No. This is a poker player. But I was playing at Jerry's house, Alice in Chains, the hard rock band. And so he asked, and I said, we're doing this fight. I tell him the story. And he goes, it happened to my brother Dave. I said, what? He goes, in a biker bar in Oklahoma, Dave gets in a fight. He said the guy has him on the pool table. He's got him by his ears, and he's cracking his head on the slate. And he goes, Dave's in a panic trying to push him off, and he felt his ring finger hit something soft, and he knew it was an eyeball, and he rammed his finger in the guy's skull. And Dave lived. So I go to work the next day, and I go, David, I got an idea. I know how we're going to end it. So I tell him the story. David's, that works. Hey, makeup, could we get a dangling eyeball? Yeah. Okay, get a dangling eyeball for Al's eye. That works. So makeup comes in with the eyeball. We're shooting it. And Al Graff, the captain, he goes, well, what would happen when, with my eye? And I said, well, man, all the capillaries would burst. I bet the other eye would be blinded with blood. Well, I see Keller down the way. And I go, I'll get an answer. So I go jogging down about 20 yards, and he's leaning up against this post. And I said, Al, what happened? Both guys named Al. I said, Al, what happens when somebody loses their eye? He goes, they scream. They scream a lot. And I felt this chill go down my spine. I go back. Now, Al Graff played in the NFL. Like, he's a tough dude. Al goes, well, what did he say? I went, you scream. You just scream a lot. So that was how the eyeball gag happened. So it was a bit of my life and a bit of Cantrell's life and Keller. So.
All right, so what are some of the most fun scenes you've done in an episode, both of you?
Well,
in the series, rather.
I think the scene between me and Al, the cocksucker scene was...
That's a classic, all-time TV classic, no matter genre, no matter anything.
Now, if you think about it, David would be meticulous about writing. But when it came to me, he'd say, I don't know Chinese. And that's all you can speak. He says, but you can speak one word, and it's got to be this word. So you and like he said to Earl, you guys come up with something. So we worked on it, and we worked on it, and we didn't know how it was going to be, and Ian would say, let's rehearse this, And we rehearsed this for a long time. Just he and I in one room, just me and Ian McShane, and I mean, it's just a privilege to be with somebody like that who has that many years of experience as an actor, to work with him. And we didn't know if it was going to work. David would come in and go, okay, what about the woo and the who and the Jew thing? And we go, oh, okay, let's fit that in there. And we didn't know, as soon as we started with the camera, everybody go, cut, director go, cut. Why is the camera shaking? And the operators would go, we can't stop laughing. We knew that scene would mean something. So it was a scene without David Milch's dialogue, but it was a scene that was collectively with David and Ian, and it was just fun. And it goes to that scene with you and I about the San Francisco cocksucker thing was another thing, because we came up with a lot of that too, I went, I was going like, this guy, this, San Francisco, this cocksucker,
I can't understand you, Woo. I ain't as smart as Al. I don't have time for this fucking bullshit.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of it was David's trust in us. And I can just say that as a collective body, there was a lot of love and trust. And if you couldn't respond, he'd just kill you off. And so finally we got to a unit where we were like, I can just say the experience of working with all of the people from Deadwood has been like no other. Usually when you're in an ensemble, when you're in a series, when you're in a movie, there's all kinds of egos and all kinds of personalities. But this one, we had one collective one. And that was because of the leader, which is David Milch. We all knew we weren't smarter than him.
Nobody is.
Nobody is. But yet also we felt the love from him for our work as actors, Just about one scene, you asked me what scene I really liked. The one I really liked was I went to David and I said, David, I'm wearing this cue, but, we Chinese now, we're not wearing cues. So what was that period? What happened to us as a people where we're no longer wearing cues? I said, there must be a point in history. And he wrote that scene where I cut off this cue. And I say, America. And that was one of my favorite scenes because I felt like I was speaking for my people who said, we're no longer sojourners. We're no longer traveling through this country aiming to go back. We're going to be Americans. We're going to learn English. We're going to learn how to function in this country. We're going to be a part of this country. And it meant so much to me.
Wow. It's powerful. It's powerful.
Well, you mentioned, there's nothing really negative about this, so I guess I can tell the story. He mentioned characters getting killed off. There were a couple that happened, without going into details about that. But at the end of season 2, and I take nothing away from his performance because it was phenomenal, but Powers Booth, David would write tonight what we're going to shoot tomorrow. Now, when you had those big, long-ass speeches, Billy Sanderson and Powers had a problem with it. And Powers, I didn't witness it, but I guess he kind of said, by God, I can't work this fucking way, and he got stabbed. And that was David like, well, that's the way we work, and guess what? You don't. Guess what's going to happen to Cy Tolliver? So there was no more problems after that. He healed. There was actually a story element that I remember talking about, and I so wish he had pursued it. It was bandied about that in season 3 that Cy Tolliver was going to have a turn to God. His near-death experience, he was going to build a church. It'd become churchy, be sitting on the front pew. But you leave it open for the whole season that if it's a genuine religious conversion or if it's just a con man using church and religion as a manipulation. I think that would have been a fascinating thing to explore. How you politicize religion and use it to bolster your own ego. And I don't know at what point David let that go. I mean, I think that there was one thing in the show that I don't think really bore fruit. And the idea behind it was the theater company. And David said that Deadwood is the star of the show. It's about a community. And so he said, after we fill our bellies, get a roof over our head, and we sit around the fire and we tell each other stories. And that's part of our community. It's an outgrowth. It's a part of a growing community. So that's what the theater company was going to, bring into town. I don't know that those stories, they never really paid off, with the exception of having Brian Cox and stuff that Brian brought with that character added so much to it. But I think that may have been part of why he let go of the religion angle, because he wanted to focus on that first. And I've always wondered, thinking he probably would have returned to that idea because it was just such a rich vein to mine. So.
You want to open it up to the floor for some questions?
Sure. Y'all got any specific
Y'all got some questions? You want to line up down here if you have some? And we'll...
Hell, there's a few of us. We can shout it out. I don't know if they can. Well, they might not hear you
We'll
back
just line
there.
up right here. How about that? You guys wanted close-up experiences, right?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. What's your name?
Stacy, yeah. Garrett Dillahunt, between the show and the movie, we noticed on the movie, played 3 completely different people. And when I first saw season 2, I was like, I had to do a double take. I was like, that's a different guy.
Francis Walcott
Yeah.
and Jack McCall.
And then a random person in the audience pelting Hurst with dog crap or whatever.
I hope you die in the mud like my daddy did.
Yes. So how in the world does someone get 3 different roles, complete different characters on the same show?
Well, first of all, Garrett has an immense capacity. Garrett's like Viggo Mortensen. He is a character actor in a leading man's body, who's really handsome, like leading man handsome, but has this capacity to become other human beings. So that's part of it. The second part of it is David doesn't like auditioning actors. But the reason being is because he doesn't want to tell anybody no. David wanted to make everybody's dreams come true. Then he might meet you, go, you know what, you're fascinating. I think, would you like to play something in the show? He meant it. He absolutely meant it in the moment that he offered it. But he offered it to that it was impossible to fulfill everybody's dreams. So a part of that is he didn't like auditioning other people. Hence, he used a lot of the same people. NYPD Blue, I did an NYPD Blue, although he didn't remember me from NYPD Blue. So that was part of it. And I think he knew there was more there with Garrett that he could get out of him. And of course, Francis Walcott, you wanted somebody that was Tim Oliphant handsome. And Garrett is, and he was really uglied up as Jack McCall. So, yeah, we'll just have Garrett do it. And then when the movie rolled around, Jim Beaver wanted to come back too. We talked about what scene that Jim could, get into. But David's the one that came up with, we'll put him in a street. You'll yell something at Hurst. So that's how that came about.
Well, David, he puts truth before reality.
Yeah.
So, in other words, people will come up and go, well, historically, people from the West didn't do that. And he'd say, I'm bored with that kind of reality. I'm looking for the truth. So you're in your room, watching your TV, and you suspend belief. Mm-hmm. You're not saying, oh, well, I'm in my room sitting on a couch watching TV. You get into what's the truth of the story. And he was more into truth. So whoever did the part had to be able to transcend, make that connection for you in terms of belief.
Well, I've often thought about with him, there's a great line of Tennessee Williams from The Glass Menagerie. I'm paraphrasing. But when Tom is talking to the audience, he says, I'm like the magician. But whereas the magician gives you illusion in the guise of truth, I give you truth in the guise of illusion, which I always thought that was David.
Yeah.
David never let the historical record stand in the way of finding a unique way to get to the truth and honesty of the moment. Hence our language. I know with some I explained because I asked him, about it, especially as I went into the trailer. And he said, well, we don't know how they spoke. There is no recordings. There were no devices. Because the only thing we have of their communications are the written correspondences, their letters. Anybody that was schooled at that point were schooled in Victorian literature, which is a very flowery literature. And I said, well, what about our use of these words? And he said, well, the first law that was passed in Deadwood, they split North and South Deadwood. In North Deadwood, you could not curse or spit on the sidewalk. So if the first law that they passed was spitting and cursing, they had to be some spitting and cursing suckers. So that's where the language came out of. Again, we have no proof they didn't speak that way. We're used to the patois of the American Western, the movies that I grew up on. Yeah. And well, that's a funny one. This was second season, and I said something to Dave. We're on set, and I'm dressed as Doherty. I said something about our Western. We're not doing a Western. No, this was first season. I said, what do you, We're not. He goes, no, your archetypical American Western, of which I was never a fan of, was basically a justification for manifest destiny. They were the lies that we told ourselves to justify the savageries that we committed. And that's what those movies were. They were about the individualism in the great wide expanses. Our show is not that. Our show is about community. It is about how we as people tend to cleave together and form this bond, and structure and order come out of that bond. I said, yeah, but dude, I'm wearing boots and a 6-shooter. It's a fucking Western. So that David said he wasn't a fan of those movies, really at any period. And it was HBO that he went in and pitched a show about ancient Rome. He wanted to study, how does order form from chaos? How does community conform and create? Well, they already had Rome in development. So they said, can you thematically take that idea and apply it to the Old West? Because we want to do a show about Wild Bill Hickok and Calamity Jane. We want to set it in Deadwood. So he did a couple of days of reading. The real Deadwood, illegal settlement. We had a treaty because those were the Black Hills were sacred. And so we had a treaty with the tribes. It's their land. Well, then some white guy found gold, and everything went out the window. So within a 6-month span of time, Deadwood went from 0 population to over 10,000 people. Its first 5 years of existence, it averaged over 500 murders a year. The town fluctuated between 10, 20, 25,000 people. But, it was always changing because people coming and going. But that's a murder and a half in a day of 10 to 20,000 people. That's a lot of killing. So David quickly realized that this is the perfect Petri dish. And I can also delve into American history. So that's how the show came to fruition, was him applying his ideas about law and social order to that chaotic situation.
Other questions? What's your name?
I'm Isla, Murray State grad.
Go Racers!
I always found the language of Deadwood, you were speaking about it being Victorian influenced, but it's particularly Shakespearean in a lot of ways.
It's in meter.
It has a very Shakespearean cadence.
It's in iambic pentameter,
Right.
It is.
And even some of the scenes are just so right out of Shakespeare, even to the,
And a lot of
speaking
scenes
to a
out of
dead
the
head,
Shakespeare and the Bible were probably the places that we mined most of the stories that we borrowed from. Yeah.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit more to the influence?
Thank you.
You want this? Oh, well, yeah. Well,
I mean, I spoke Chinese.
Yeah. I can't do that. Again, he had a meter in NYPD Blue. I mean, that's just Dave's ear. If you look at Shakespeare, iambic pentameter is 10 beats to a meter, and with alternating emphasis. Da 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 da. Next line. And Shakespeare is written in those 10 syllables, 10 syllables. Well, David ran the sentences together, so if you looked at the page, it wasn't readily apparent. But if you sat there and started counting syllables, it was there. It's interesting that, well, I mentioned some of that. I met so many and befriended so many musicians, Dusty and Billy being among them. Didn't know the poetry form, but had a musical ear and were drawn to it. Toby Keith, he goes, man, that language, I ain't never heard that language. I mean, it's, naughty words, but man, because I think they have a musical ear. They pick up that rhythm. So that's what it came out of. And with Dave, as he said, the truth comes first. And Dave wanted to find an interesting way to get to that truth. So his use of language was that. And that's why I say, I had a couple of people back home. Man, everybody says that Western Union's really good, but we go to church. And I can't listen to that. I said, well, those words. I said, well, a lot of our stories are drawn from the Bible. Like, John the Baptist, that's what he drew the preacher Smith. And Dave said, I remember him talking about that. He goes, a lot of the mystics, he goes, both in the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, he goes, they didn't know what the fuck epilepsy was then. And we didn't know what schizophrenia was. But he says, who is to say that those phrases, the way that those brains affected operate, is not truth? Who's to say that? Like our brain's a reducer. Well, schizophrenia opens that reduction up. Not to say I'd want to live as schizophrenic, but he doesn't discount. So that was where the tumor on Preacher Smith's brain was causing these seizures. We as a modern audience can recognize that and see it. But it was David's thesis that John the Baptist was. So that was based a lot on David's ideas toward those stories in the Bible. So,
Bible Belt.
Yeah.
Represent.
Yep.
That's where I'm from too.
Well, man, you could tell some Bible stories, but if you say you're out the door.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. What's your name?
I'm Debbie. My husband over here and I, we love Deadwood so much, and we did watch the movie, and we were playing a drinking game watching the movie where we were taking a shot every time the C word was said. I didn't want to say, the word, but we didn't die. So obviously the language was toned down a little bit for the movie. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I mean, if you noticed, everything was advanced. The town had grown, and the production design, because the town had burned. And I thought one of the ingenious things that Maria did in the design, if you look closely, like at the stables and stuff, you'll see fire damage. So, like, the idea was every building did not collapse. So there's the scorched buildings. So with Dan's top hat and haircut and nicer clothes, and I think the language was part of that, because they were a more advanced cultural town at that point. So I think that was part of it. His choice of colorful language was just as colorful, but he didn't work in the blues as much. So, but yeah.
About language, we've listened to the Nixon tapes, and we've seen him at his press conferences, and we see what truth really is and what people are really like and how they talk. And I'm waiting for that to happen in a political series, and I don't know if it has but you look at West Wing, and the language is really conservative. But how real politicians talk and how they plot and how they perceive, and even today we see tapes, we hear tapes, and you see the real language of people. It's much more interesting, to me, anyway.
Well, Dave always said, we as people, he goes, look, your choice of words, you're a self-identifying. You're telling other people, if you use those words, you're telling polite society, I'm not like you. You are defining yourself within that world, in any world, by the words that you use. So the same as the church folk from back home who told me they couldn't watch it because they went to church. Again, those words, I do not buy your strict orthodoxy. So I choose to use this word, and so that was a lot of it. And David said it just doesn't mean obscenities and curse words. It's in how you view both yourself and the world. Those are the words that you choose to present yourself to the world.
But didn't, Christians realize their history?
That would depend. Christian is a very broad brush.
I know, but those Christians, didn't they know their own history? Because, we Chinese, when we saw the Westerners come into China and they get slapped and they turn the other cheek, the Chinese be going, what is wrong with them? Because our culture is built on revenge. And
have you really paid attention to a lot of Christianity these days?
That's what I'm saying.
There's not a lot of cheek turning.
I know they like to perceive themselves in the front of saying, "Turn the other cheek. Be as good as to those who as how you would want to be treated."
Well, that's
there's a contradiction there in your history and what you are teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where his truth, erupts between the fake and the real.
That's why I wish we'd been able to pursue the Cy Tolliver Church thing, because we really could have dug in deep. Now, again, being haunted by the, certain sermons that I heard as a child that would keep me awake at night, I don't think they realized that we actually listened. So I'm prone to, I want to hear those stories because I want to examine the ghosts in my own mind. Mm-hmm. Which was why I was so hoping that would happen. But
any other chances at a sequel to the series or any
without
offshoots?
David Milch, there is no Deadwood.
Okay.
And Alzheimer's has taken David Milch. I couldn't. If his daughter Olivia did it, or Regina Corrado, who was really his right hand, if Olivia were involved, I could in good conscience return. But if we didn't have Milch, and we don't, so.
Yeah, it would be a bunch of wild stallions.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, you've seen it impersonated by numerous other shows.
Yeah.
Nobody can be David but David.
Right.
It's like listening to people play Little Wing. There ain't but one Jimi Hendrix, man. There ain't but one Miles Davis.
Yeah.
And no matter how accomplished or good you are, you ain't Jimi Hendrix and you ain't Miles Davis. And in TV, there ain't David Milch, except for David Milch.
Understood. Other questions? Come on, I know y'all got questions. All right, here we go. What's your name?
Jeff, the sense of realism was one of the reasons made me like the show so much. In so much that some of the moments felt so real, they were kind of scary, which was one of the things about the show. It was edgy. One of the scariest things to me were the pigs. Were they, and I know pigs on a farm, they can be some aggressive, scary creatures. So working with the pigs, were they scary
I got a pig
or?
story, but I know he's got one too.
Yeah,
so.
I know. Let me hear your pig story.
My granddaddy had a hog farm, and he was in Hardin, lived outside of Hardin. And at one point, he had like 1,200 head. He had a big hog operation. My great-grandmother on my daddy's side would babysit me. Now, on the weekends, we would go over to Mama's daddy's parents' house. I would have to work. Now, Sundays, you did not work. Les wouldn't pick up a tool on Sunday. But Saturdays, by God, it didn't matter how old you were, you worked. So I'd have to go work the damn hogs. Now, my grandmother, Blanche, great-grandmother, who babysat me, would tell me stories. She was, in her simple way, she was trying to protect me. But there was a girl in my holler growing up, hog bit her arm off, right at the elbow. Bit her arm clean off. Them hogs is mean. You guys should be careful of them hogs. So I would hear this shit, and then on Saturday, I'd be working hogs. So I was seven or eight. I remember I had a brand new pair of tennis shoes from the Big K. They were Chuck Taylor knockoffs. I had to go, he had a herd that he had just weaned, he'd weaned the sows, weaned their piglets off. The sows were in this field on the side, on the hillside. So we had grain corn. So he unhooks, I get out, unhook the fence. He goes, "Oh, son, just get in the truck. We're going to drive right back out. Just leave it unhooked." So I'd kill the electricity to the fence, thank God. Hopped out, we're shoveling, calling the sows, and they're not coming up. He goes, "Go down there and run them up." All right. So my 7-year-old fat little ass hops off, jumps over the fence, down the hill. I'm yelling at the sows. Most of them take off. We had a sow, I don't know if this was her, but we had a sow that ate her piglets. So he would have to sit there and watch when she was about to birth because he'd have to pull them away or she would eat them. I don't know if this was the sow, but I'm yelling. She ain't going. So I pick up a limb. She's about 10, 15 feet from me, and about from me to you, and I throw this limb at her. It hit her on the snout, and when it did, she charged me. My 7-year-old mind's first thought, she's going to bite my arm off. So I go running and, get to the fence, pop it down, throw my leg up. The fence popped back up. It caught me. I still have a scar on my lower leg and up by my crotch. So I'm hung on the barbs of the fence. He thought I was yelling at the hogs. So I hung there for about 5 minutes. And I remember, I'm terrified. She stopped, and she's watching me. And I kept thinking, she's going to eat me. She's going to eat me. So there's this primal fucking fear buried inside me at 7 years old. He heard me yell his name, and he came down and unhooked me. And I remember I ruined my new tennis shoes because the left one was full of blood. So the white shoes were forever blood stained. So I hate fucking hogs. So when we had this scene, eating the body, when it came up in the script, I thought, oh my God, Granny was right.
Well, when the pig herders, we had pig herders actually. And when I first had to go into the pen and throw the guy in the pen, he said, "Don't touch them, whatever you do, because they will bite your fingers off." And that's what he told me. And then I was,
They bite your arm off, Keone. They bite it plumb at the elbow.
All right, I think that's probably all the time we
done?
have for questions. Maybe one more question. We have time for one more question.
Anybody have something really pressing?
One more question.
One more
question.
One more.
Super important question. You got one. All right, what's your name? Get close.
It's Gavin. So I like what you said that the show was about the newborn And has everybody
The
seen
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has everybody seen the movie? Okay. I like how it ends with Swearingen's death, and there's this slow build-up where everybody gets to say goodbye. What was it like in your final scenes with Al?
Thank you. You're good.
I was on set when Jerry and he filmed the scene. Jerry's health was not good. Having to wear that back brace made it much worse. She needed another surgery. She was in horrible pain. We had the first scene was when she's bringing the peaches out for the meeting. You know, I forget what the dialogue was, but I could tell how much she was hurting. And I sat next to her. Now, thank God she was wrong, because she has done stuff since. But she turned to me and she goes, "It's such a blessing to be here." And she said, "This is it. For me, my body's failing. This is it. And so I'm so thankful that this is what is." Again, she's wrong, because she's much better now than she was a year ago. But I was there. My friend Rob Bias from Nashville, musician, was visiting, and I took him to the set, and it just happened to be that day. She fell off the bed in the scene. So we had happening in real time, one of us in horrible pain, whose body's failing. So this is what it was, you know, watching it, and David was there, you know. Some days Dave would be 100% with us, and some days he wouldn't. Either his daughter or his wife were always there at his elbow. So it was really tough. But for me, it was a blessing, because it gave me, it's a fucking cliche, but closure, a moment of, you know, and to say to David, to be there with David, to acknowledge everything that he gave to me. And I know you feel the same.
Well, like I said, you know, a lot of things were cut out of the final cut. And there was one, Swearingen was kind of like, for me, Dave.
Yeah,
you know,
Swearingen was Dave.
You know, and I never took it as, and for us, just being with Dave and knowing what he was like and seeing him now, everybody was just devastated, because the love for Dave is just very deep. And not just respect, but true love, because he loved us. So when Swearingen was on his bed, I think that was our responsibility as performers to convey that, because that's what we wanted to convey. But I still hope, and you said Swearingen's death. He didn't die.
Yes, he did.
I mean, but
that's up to interpretation. It's everybody's interpretation. That's why I've asked people to the film, okay, is he dead or not?
And then I like to think that no, he's not dead yet. You know. So.
It's so funny because I hear myself say it and I hear you say it, and you tell it to people that didn't know Dave, and you want to think of Dave as some kind of bead and sandal wearing shaman who's so in touch with the spirit and shit. He's the opposite of that. You know, he could be a cantankerous son of a bitch, and he could be really difficult to deal with, you know, but at his core, there was that, you know. I've never met him. I've never met anybody really like him. I've met a few people that had that level of intellect, but almost without fail, there's an emotional disconnect that comes along with that much, your brain being so powerful. Dave had an emotional intelligence that rivaled his intellect. Dave was able, you know, Greg Feinberg is the first one that said this to me. He goes, Dave was able to see you at your core and see all the cracks. And I added to that, and Dave being Dave, he wanted to fix them all. You know, layered on top of that with Dave was a self-destructive streak a mile wide. He was a heroin addict for years and an absolute alcoholic, pill addicted. There wasn't an addiction out there that Dave did not partake of, you know, and live in such a self-destructive way, which was so ironic to me, which probably came out of the vulnerability of that spirit, because he was so full of love and community and connection. but some part of him had to, change things. And so that was the complication of being David Milch.
I will just say, you've never lived until you've had David Milch call you an idiot.
Yeah. Well, as a writer, you would come up with ideas and you would develop something. This is my favorite. I hand him 3 things I had written. Standing outside the soundstage. So I give him the pages. Well, that is absolute shit.